Sometimes the quietest person in the room carries the loudest story. Sometimes the one everyone underestimates holds secrets that could silence an entire battalion. In military boot camp, where breaking people down is an art form and building them back up is the mission, assumptions can be deadly. What happens when drill sergeants and fellow recruits discover that the small, quiet girl they've been tormenting isn't just another scared civilian trying to make it through training? What happens when a simple tattoo reveals a past so extraordinary that it changes everything they thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and what it truly means to serve? This is the story of Maya Chen, a 19-year-old who walked into Fort Benning carrying more than just a duffel bag. She carried the weight of a secret that would transform not just her own journey, but the lives of everyone who dared to laugh at her. Because sometimes, the person you think is weakest is actually the strongest one in the room. And sometimes, a single tattoo can tell a story more powerful than any medal or commendation ever could. The yellow school bus pulled up to the gates of Fort Benning on a sweltering Georgia morning in July. Maya Chen pressed her face against the scratched window, watching as the imposing military installation came into view. Her stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and dread. At 19, she looked even younger, standing barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, with a slight frame that seemed almost fragile against the backdrop of concrete buildings and razor wire. As the bus doors hissed open, Maya grabbed her small duffel bag and stepped onto the asphalt. The Georgia heat hit her like a wall, but it was nothing compared to the wave of shouting that erupted from the drill sergeants waiting to greet the new recruits. Immediately, she felt out of place among the group of young men and women who had arrived with her. Many of them looked like they had stepped out of a fitness magazine, tall and muscular with confident strides. Maya, on the other hand, moved quietly, almost invisibly, through the chaos. "Move it! Move it! Move it!" bellowed Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, an imposing man whose voice could probably be heard 3 counties over. "You maggots think this is summer camp? Welcome to hell!" Maya kept her head down and followed the crowd toward the processing building. She had expected this, had mentally prepared herself for the screaming and intimidation tactics. What she hadn't prepared for was the way her fellow recruits looked at her, with barely concealed amusement and pity. "Look at that tiny thing," whispered a tall blonde girl named Jessica, loud enough for Maya to hear. "She'll be crying for her mommy by dinner time." A burly guy named Derek, who looked like he could bench press Maya with one hand, chuckled. "I give her 2 days max before she washes out. Some people just aren't cut out for this." Maya said nothing, but her jaw tightened slightly. She had heard worse, much worse. The whispers and snickers followed her through the initial processing, through the medical examinations, and into the barracks where she was assigned a bottom bunk in a corner. Her small stature and quiet demeanor made her an easy target for the kind of casual cruelty that emerged when people were stressed and looking for someone weaker to pick on. During the first uniform fitting, Maya's slight frame was even more apparent. The smallest sizes still seemed to hang loose on her, making her look like a child playing dress-up in her parents' clothes. The other recruits found this hilarious. "Hey, Chen," called out Marcus, another recruit who had quickly established himself as the self-appointed leader of their group. "Did they run out of adult sizes? You look like you're wearing a tent." The laughter that followed was mean-spirited and loud. Maya continued lacing up her boots, her face showing no emotion. She had learned long ago that reacting to bullies only made things worse. Better to stay invisible, to endure, and to prove herself when it mattered. The first few days of basic training were a nightmare of physical challenges, mental games, and constant harassment from both the drill sergeants and her fellow recruits. During morning PT, Maya struggled with some of the exercises. Her small frame made push-ups difficult, and she couldn't keep up with the stronger recruits during runs. Every stumble, every moment of weakness was met with eye rolls and whispered comments. "She's bringing down our whole platoon," Derek complained to Jessica during chow time. "How did someone like her even get accepted? There should be minimum physical requirements." "Maybe she knew someone," Jessica replied with a smirk. "Or maybe they needed to fill a diversity quota." Maya sat alone at meals, methodically eating while listening to the conversations around her. She noticed everything, remembered everything. The way Rodriguez favored certain recruits, the way the natural leaders emerged, the way alliances formed and shifted. She was developing a mental map of her environment, something that came as naturally to her as breathing. The physical training was grueling, but Maya persevered through sheer determination. When she fell behind during runs, she finished anyway, even if she was last. When she struggled with obstacle courses, she kept trying until she made it over or through. Her quiet persistence began to annoy some of the other recruits even more than her initial weakness had. "Why doesn't she just quit?" Marcus complained after watching Maya struggle through the rope climb for the 20th time. "She's obviously not cut out for this." Some people need to know their limitations. But Maya kept pushing forward. Day after day, week after week, she learned to ignore the comments, the laughter, the way conversation stopped when she entered a room. She focused on the training, on learning everything she could about weapons, tactics, survival skills, and military protocol. While other recruits complained about the lectures and tried to sleep through classes, Maya absorbed every word. 3 weeks into basic training, something shifted. Maya's times began improving, slowly but noticeably. Her push-ups became more fluid, her runs faster. She started completing obstacle courses without falling. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. Some of the recruits began to take notice, though not in a positive way. "Great," Derek muttered after Maya finished third in a tactical knowledge test. "The runt is trying to show off now. Probably thinks she's better than us." The mockery took on a new edge. Instead of just laughing at her perceived weakness, they began to resent what they saw as her trying too hard. Maya had become a threat to their established social order, and they didn't like it. It was during a particularly difficult week of field exercises that the harassment reached its peak. The platoon was practicing night maneuvers in the Georgia wilderness, learning to move silently through difficult terrain while carrying full packs and weapons. Maya had excelled at these exercises, her small size finally becoming an advantage as she could move through underbrush and tight spaces that larger recruits struggled with. "Teacher's pet," Jessica whispered as they prepared for another night exercise, trying so hard to impress the drill sergeants. Some of us don't need to overcompensate. That night, as the platoon moved through the dark forest, someone deliberately tripped Maya, sending her sprawling into a muddy creek. Her weapon went flying, her pack scattered its contents, and she emerged soaked and covered in mud. The group moved on without her, leaving her to gather her equipment alone in the darkness. When she finally caught up, wet and bedraggled, the laughter was immediate and cruel. "Nice swimming, Chen," Marcus called out. "Maybe you should have joined the Navy instead." Even some of the drill sergeants seemed amused by her appearance. "Recruit Chen, did you decide to take a detour through the swamp?" Sergeant Rodriguez asked with barely concealed mirth. Maya stood at attention, water still dripping from her uniform. "No excuse, drill sergeant. Clean yourself up. You're a disgrace to the uniform." As Maya walked away to change into dry clothes, she could hear the continued laughter and comments behind her. But something had changed in her expression. The quiet acceptance was still there, but underneath it, something harder had emerged. Something that had been forged long before she ever set foot in Georgia. Later that night, as she lay in her bunk, listening to the snores and whispered conversations around her, Maya's hand unconsciously moved to her back. Beneath her regulation undershirt, hidden from view, was the reason she had really come to Fort Benning, the reason she endured the harassment, the reason she pushed herself beyond her limits, the reason she would never quit no matter what they threw at her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for her fellow recruits to underestimate her. But Maya knew something they didn't. She knew that sometimes the smallest person in the room carried the biggest secret, and she knew that very soon everything would change. The tattoo on her back seemed to burn against her skin as she finally drifted off to sleep, the weight of her hidden past pressing down on her like a promise waiting to be revealed. Week 6 of basic training brought with it the kind of oppressive heat that made even the drill sergeants move a little slower. Maya had settled into a routine of endurance, both physical and mental. Her performance had improved dramatically, though she still faced daily ridicule from her fellow recruits. What bothered them most wasn't her initial weakness anymore, but her refusal to break down despite everything they threw at her. The harassment had evolved into something more systematic and cruel. Maya's equipment would mysteriously go missing before inspections. Her bunk would be messed up after she'd made it perfectly. Food would disappear from her tray when she wasn't looking. The perpetrators were never caught. But Maya knew exactly who was responsible. She said nothing, did nothing, just quietly fixed whatever needed fixing and moved on. "I don't get it," Derek said to Marcus during a break between training exercises. "Nothing gets to her. It's like she's not even human sometimes." "Maybe she's too stupid to realize she's being picked on," Jessica added with a nasty laugh. "Some people are just too dense to get the message." But Maya wasn't dense, and she was getting the message loud and clear. She just had different priorities than they realized. Every morning she woke up with a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with proving herself to her tormentors. She was here for reasons they couldn't begin to understand, carrying a burden they couldn't imagine. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a routine combat training exercise. The platoon was practicing hand-to-hand combat techniques, working in pairs to master basic defensive and offensive moves. Maya had been paired with Derek, who outweighed her by at least 80 pounds and stood nearly a foot taller. "Try not to hurt me too bad, Tiny," Derek said with a smirk as they faced each other on the practice mat. The comment drew snickers from the other recruits who had gathered to watch what they expected to be an amusing mismatch. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez demonstrated the technique they were supposed to practice, a simple defensive maneuver designed to neutralize an attacker's advantage. "The key," he explained, "is using your opponent's momentum against them. Size doesn't always matter if you know what you're doing." Derek clearly hadn't been paying attention to the instruction. As soon as Rodriguez moved on to observe other pairs, Derek grabbed Maya roughly by the shoulders, using far more force than the exercise required. "Come on, Chen," he taunted. "Show me what you've got. Don't be afraid to fight back." Maya performed the defensive technique exactly as demonstrated, but Derek refused to play along with the training scenario. Instead, he increased his aggression, treating the exercise like a real fight. When Maya tried to step back and reset, he grabbed her again, this time even harder. "What's wrong?" Derek laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Can't handle a little contact? Maybe you should have joined the Girl Scouts instead of the Army." The other recruits had stopped their own practice to watch the spectacle. Even some of the other drill sergeants had wandered over, though they seemed content to let the situation play out as long as it didn't get too far out of hand. Maya tried once more to execute the proper technique, but Derek was no longer following any rules. He grabbed her in a headlock that was far beyond the scope of the exercise, his forearm pressing against her throat with real force. Maya tapped out, the universal signal to stop, but Derek either didn't see it or chose to ignore it. "Derek, ease up," called out another recruit, but Derek was enjoying his moment of dominance too much to listen. It was then that something shifted in Maya's demeanor. The quiet acceptance vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. Her body language changed subtly, her stance becoming more balanced, more centered. Those who knew what to look for might have recognized the shift, but Derek was too caught up in his performance to notice. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but it would be replayed in the minds of everyone present for years to come. Maya's small hand found a precise pressure point on Derek's wrist, causing him to involuntarily release his hold. As he stumbled back in confusion and pain, she flowed into a movement so smooth and natural it looked almost like dancing. Derek found himself airborne, spinning through the air before crashing down onto the mat with a sound that echoed across the training area. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek lay on the mat, stunned and gasping for air, while Maya stood over him in a stance that spoke of years of training that had nothing to do with basic military instruction. Her breathing was calm, controlled, as if what had just happened required no more effort than swatting a fly. "What the hell was that?" Derek wheezed, struggling to sit up. Maya's expression had already returned to its usual neutral mask, but something in her eyes remained different. "Harder." "The technique Drill Sergeant Rodriguez demonstrated," she said quietly. "I used your momentum against you." Drill Sergeant Rodriguez had gone very still, studying Maya with new interest. His trained eye had caught details that the recruits had missed. The precision of her movements, the way she'd controlled Derek's fall to avoid serious injury despite having every justification to hurt him, the stance she'd unconsciously fallen into afterward. This wasn't beginner's luck or a fluke. This was someone with serious training trying very hard to look like an amateur. "Interesting technique, Recruit Chen," Rodriguez said slowly. "Where exactly did you learn to do that?" For just a moment, Maya's composure flickered. "Just following your instruction, Drill Sergeant." Rodriguez didn't look convinced, but he didn't push the issue. Not yet. Everyone back to work. Chen, switch partners. But the damage was done. The comfortable dynamic that had existed for 6 weeks had been shattered in an instant. As the platoon resumed their exercises, Maya could feel the eyes on her, could hear the whispered conversations. Derek kept glancing at her with a mixture of embarrassment and newfound wariness. That evening, during personal time, the speculation began in earnest. "Did you see how she moved?" Jessica whispered to a group of recruits. That wasn't normal. Nobody learns to fight like that from basic training. Maybe she took some martial arts classes in high school, suggested another recruit, but even she didn't sound convinced by her own theory. Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since the incident, finally spoke up. "I've been thinking about Chen since we got here. There's something off about her. She's too calm, too focused. Normal people crack under this pressure, but she just absorbs everything like it's nothing." "What are you saying?" Derek asked, his pride still stinging from his public humiliation. "I'm saying maybe we don't know anything about her. Maybe there's more to little Maya Chen than meets the eye." Meanwhile, Maya lay in her bunk, acutely aware that her carefully maintained facade had developed a crack. She had worked so hard to appear weak, to blend in, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But Derek had pushed too hard, and her instincts had taken over. Now she could feel the curiosity and suspicion growing around her like a living thing. She thought about the conversation she'd had with her handler before enlisting, the careful instructions about maintaining her cover, about the importance of appearing ordinary. "You need to disappear completely," he had told her. "Become just another face in the crowd. Your past cannot follow you there." But the past had a way of revealing itself, especially when muscle memory took over in moments of crisis. Maya touched her back again, feeling the raised lines of the tattoo beneath her shirt. Soon, she knew, questions would be asked that she couldn't deflect with simple answers. Soon, someone would start digging deeper into her background. The next morning brought new challenges. During PT, Maya noticed that her every movement was being watched and analyzed. When she performed well, it was viewed with suspicion. When she struggled, it was seen as an act. She had become a puzzle that her fellow recruits were determined to solve. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez seemed particularly interested in her performance during weapons training. Maya had to consciously slow herself down, force herself to make mistakes that would seem natural for someone with her supposed background. But Rodriguez's sharp eyes missed nothing, and she could see him making mental notes. "Recruit Chen," he called out after she had completed the rifle assembly exercise. Not bad for someone who claimed to have never handled a weapon before enlistment. Maya kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, Drill Sergeant. I've been practicing like you taught us." "I'm sure you have." His tone suggested he didn't believe her for a second. "Tell me, what did your parents do for work?" It was a casual question, asked while he pretended to focus on his clipboard, but Maya recognized it for what it was. The first probe into her background. "My father worked in a restaurant." Maya answered truthfully. "My mother was a seamstress." "And you grew up where exactly?" "San Francisco, Drill Sergeant." Maya knew that by evening someone would be making phone calls, running background checks, asking questions about Maya Chen from San Francisco. She wondered how long it would take them to find the inconsistencies, the gaps in her story, the carefully constructed lies that had gotten her this far. That night, as she lay listening to the sounds of the barracks around her, Maya made a decision. She had known this moment would come eventually. The training, the discipline, the skills she had acquired over years of preparation, they were all too ingrained to hide indefinitely. She could feel the walls closing in, could sense that her time as just another recruit was running out. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new scrutiny, new attempts to uncover her secrets. And when those attempts finally succeeded, when someone finally saw the tattoo that told her real story, everything would change. Not just for her, but for everyone who had spent the last 6 weeks treating her like she was nothing more than a weak girl playing soldier. Maya closed her eyes and prepared herself for what was coming. The quiet phase of her mission was about to end, and the real work was about to begin. The investigation began the next morning, though Maya was the only one who recognized it for what it was. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez had been joined by Sergeant Major Williams, a stern woman whose reputation for thoroughness was legendary throughout Fort Benning. They watched Maya during morning PT with the kind of focused attention that made the other recruits nervous. "Something's going on with Chen," Derek muttered to Marcus as they completed their push-ups. "Look how they're watching her." Marcus had been thinking the same thing. The incident during combat training had bothered him more than he cared to admit. He kept replaying the moment in his mind, analyzing the way Maya had moved, the complete lack of surprise or panic in her response. It wasn't natural. People didn't just casually flip someone twice their size unless they had serious training. By afternoon, the whispers had spread throughout the platoon. Everyone had theories about Maya, ranging from the plausible to the ridiculous. Some thought she might have been a competitive martial artist in civilian life. Others speculated about military family connections. A few even wondered if she might be some kind of spy or undercover agent, though they said it jokingly, not realizing how close to the truth they were. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine medical examination. All recruits were required to undergo periodic health checks, and this week it was Maya's turn. She had been dreading this moment since her arrival, knowing that her carefully maintained secret would inevitably be discovered. Dr. Patricia Mills was the base physician conducting the examinations. She was known for her thoroughness and her no-nonsense approach to military medicine. Maya sat on the examination table in a hospital gown, her back turned away from the doctor as Dr. Mills checked her vital signs. "Everything looks normal so far," Dr. Mills said, making notes on her tablet. "Just need to check your back for any issues with posture or muscle development. These heavy packs can sometimes cause problems." Maya closed her eyes, knowing there was no way to avoid what was coming next. She felt Dr. Mills' hands on her shoulders as the doctor began her examination, checking for signs of strain or injury. There was a moment of routine inspection, and then Dr. Mills went very still. "Recruit Chen," the doctor said quietly, her voice suddenly different. "I need you to explain this tattoo to me." Maya had known this moment would come, had rehearsed her response hundreds of times, but sitting there in the sterile medical room, she found herself at a loss for words. The tattoo that covered most of her upper back was impossible to explain away or dismiss. It was too detailed, too specific, too meaningful to be anything other than what it was. "It's just a tattoo, ma'am," Maya said quietly, but even she knew how inadequate that response was. Dr. Mills moved around to face Maya, her expression serious. "Recruit Chen, I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I know exactly what that tattoo represents, and it's not something a 19-year-old civilian gets for aesthetic reasons. That's a military commendation rendered in ink. Specifically, it's the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star, and the Purple Heart, along with unit insignias I recognize from Special Operations Command." Maya met the doctor's eyes steadily. "I can explain. I certainly hope so." Because right now I'm looking at what appears to be a very young woman with decorations that would take a career soldier 20 years to earn if they were exceptionally lucky and brave. And according to your file, you've never served a day in the military before basic training. Dr. Mills reached for her phone. I'm calling Sergeant Major Williams. I think we need to have a conversation about who you really are, Maya Chen. Within 20 minutes, Maya found herself sitting in Sergeant Major Williams's office, still in her medical gown with a military jacket draped over her shoulders. Also present were Dr. Mills, Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, and a man in civilian clothes who had arrived with suspicious speed, suggesting he had been expecting this call. "Recruit Chen," Sergeant Major Williams began. "Or perhaps I should ask what your real name is, because I've spent the last hour making some very interesting phone calls, and Maya Chen from San Francisco appears to be a very carefully constructed identity." The man in civilian clothes leaned forward. "Maya, it's time to drop the act. We all know why you're here." Maya looked around the room at the faces staring back at her, then made a decision that had been building for weeks. She straightened in her chair, and suddenly, the timid recruit persona fell away like a discarded mask. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made everyone in the room pay attention. "My name is Captain Maya Chen, United States Army Special Forces. I've been undercover in this training program as part of a classified operation investigating security vulnerabilities in our basic training protocols." The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Mills was the first to speak. "Captain, how old are you exactly?" 28, Maya replied. "I know I look young. It's been useful in my career." Sergeant Major Williams studied Maya with new eyes. "And the tattoo?" Maya stood and turned around, letting the jacket fall away to reveal her back fully. The tattoo was indeed a masterpiece of military artistry. The Distinguished Service Cross was prominent at the center, surrounded by other commendations and unit patches. But it was the small details that told the real story. The dates and coordinates that spoke of specific missions and operations. "Afghanistan, 2019 to 2023. Maya said quietly. 3 tours with the 75th Ranger Regiment, then transferred to Delta Force for classified operations. The tattoo commemorates fallen teammates and completed missions. Each symbol has meaning." Rodriguez shook his head in amazement. "The combat training incident. You were holding back." Significantly, Maya confirmed. "Derek outweighs me by 80 pounds, but I've been trained to neutralize targets twice that size. I was trying very hard not to hurt him while still defending myself." The man in civilian clothes, who Maya now realized must be her handler or someone connected to the operation, spoke up. "Captain Chen was inserted into this training program to evaluate potential security risks and training deficiencies. Her cover was supposed to remain intact for the full training period." "What kind of security risks?" Williams asked. Maya returned to her seat, her posture now reflecting years of military bearing. "Everything from inadequate background checks on recruits to potential vulnerabilities in how classified information is handled during training. My mission was to observe and report without revealing my identity." "But you did reveal it," Dr. Mills pointed out, "during the combat training." "A calculated risk," Maya admitted. "Derek was becoming genuinely aggressive, and I needed to protect both of us. Better to show some skill than to let someone get seriously injured." Rodriguez was studying Maya with a mixture of respect and embarrassment. "All those times we yelled at you, pushed you harder because we thought you were weak." Maya's expression softened slightly. "You were doing your job, drill sergeant. And honestly, your training methods are quite effective. I learned things about leadership and resilience that I hadn't encountered in my regular military service." Williams leaned back in her chair. "So what happens now? Do we tell the other recruits?" The man in civilian clothes answered. "That depends on Captain Chen's assessment. Has she gathered the information needed to complete her mission?" Maya considered the question carefully. "Yes. I've identified several areas where security could be improved, and I've documented various training deficiencies. But there's value in completing the full program, especially now that my cover is partially blown. It could provide additional insights into how information spreads through the ranks. What about your fellow recruits? Rodriguez asked. They're going to notice the change in how you're treated. Maya smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Actually, I have an idea about that. What if we turn this into a teaching moment? Over the next hour, Maya outlined her proposal. Rather than simply disappearing or suddenly being treated differently, she suggested using her revelation as a case study in assumptions and prejudice. The other recruits had spent weeks underestimating her based on her appearance and demeanor. Learning the truth about her background could be a powerful lesson in not judging people based on surface impressions. It's risky, Williams admitted. Some of them won't take it well. Derek, especially, is going to feel humiliated. Maybe, Maya agreed, but maybe it'll also teach them something important about the people they'll serve alongside in their military careers. Not everyone is what they appear to be on the surface. The next morning, the entire platoon was assembled in the main training room. Sergeant Major Williams stood at the front with Maya beside her. The recruits filed in with curious expressions, whispering among themselves about what kind of announcement might require this kind of formal gathering. Recruits, Williams began, you're about to learn something important about making assumptions. For the past 7 weeks, you've been training alongside someone who is not what she appears to be. Maya stepped forward, her posture and bearing completely different from what the recruits had grown accustomed to. When she spoke, her voice carried the confidence and authority of someone used to command. My name is Captain Maya Chen. I'm a Special Forces operator with 8 years of active duty service, including multiple combat deployments. For the past 7 weeks, I've been undercover, evaluating this training program as part of a classified mission. The reaction was immediate and varied. Some recruits sat in stunned silence. Others looked skeptical, as if this might be some elaborate prank. Derek's face went through a series of expressions, from disbelief to embarrassment to something that might have been anger. Jessica raised her hand. You're saying you're actually an officer? A captain? That's correct. Marcus leaned forward. So when we were making fun of you, calling you weak, you were bullying a superior officer, Maya confirmed matter-of-factly, though you didn't know it at the time. The room erupted in whispered conversations as the implications sank in. Maya let them process for a moment before continuing. I want to be clear about something. Your behavior toward me wasn't inappropriate because I outrank you. It was inappropriate because it was cruel and unprofessional, regardless of who I was. Military service requires respect for all team members, not just those you perceive as strong or important. Derek finally found his voice. So that combat training thing, when you threw me, I was using about 10% of my actual capability, Maya said gently. I was trying very hard not to hurt you while still defending myself. Over the following days, the dynamic in the platoon shifted dramatically. Some recruits, like Marcus, approached Maya with newfound respect and curiosity about her real experiences. Others, particularly Derek, struggled with the embarrassment of how they had treated her. A few seemed almost angry at being deceived, though they couldn't quite articulate why. Maya used these reactions as teaching opportunities, leading discussions about leadership, teamwork, and the importance of treating all service members with dignity. She shared stories from her deployment experiences, always focusing on the lessons rather than glorifying combat. The most important thing I learned in Afghanistan, she told them one evening, wasn't how to fight. It was how to recognize the value in every person on my team. The quiet medic who saved lives, the communication specialist who kept us connected, the cook who maintained morale. Everyone matters. As basic training neared its end, Maya reflected on her unconventional mission. She had gathered valuable intelligence about training protocols and security vulnerabilities, but more importantly, she had helped shape a group of future soldiers who might think twice before writing someone off based on appearances. Derek approached her on the final day of training. Captain Chen, he said formally, I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, actually. Maya smiled. Derek, you don't need to apologize for not recognizing something I was actively trying to hide. But I hope you've learned something about not making assumptions about people. I have, he said seriously. And I wanted to ask, could you maybe show us some of those combat techniques you know, the real ones? I think Drill Sergeant Rodriguez might have something to say about that. But Derek, you don't need to be able to flip someone through the air to be a good soldier. You just need to care about the people serving beside you. At the graduation ceremony, Maya stood with her fellow recruits as they received their completion certificates. Officially, she was still Maya Chen, recent basic training graduate. Her real identity remained classified, known only to a select few. But the lessons she had taught and learned would follow all of them throughout their military careers. As the ceremony concluded and families gathered to celebrate with the new soldiers, Maya felt a hand on her shoulder. Sergeant Major Williams stood beside her watching the celebrations. "So, Captain," Williams said quietly, "mission accomplished?" Maya watched Derek helping a younger recruit fix his uniform, saw Jessica mentoring a nervous-looking girl from the next training cycle, observed Marcus organizing a group photo that included everyone, even the quietest recruits. "Yes," Maya said with satisfaction. Mission accomplished. The tattoo on her back had finally told its story, not through revelation, but through the lessons it had enabled her to teach. Sometimes the most important victories weren't won on battlefields, but in the hearts and minds of future soldiers, learning what it truly meant to serve.